Hi, I'm Nick from the Cycle Hub, and this is the Mondraker Crafty Carbon. The Mondraker Crafty Carbon is Mondraker's flagship e-bike. It's their all-mountain, stroke enduro, hard-hitting e-bike that's really designed to do a little bit of everything. Recently, I've had the chance to get out on one and really experiment with what it feels like on the trails, what it's like to climb on, and a little bit like what it's like to live with, and who I think it might be ideal for. With me in the studio today, I've got two of the Carbon Crafty models, the Mondraker Crafty Carbon R and the Mondraker Crafty Carbon RR. Now, the Crafty R, even though it's the entry-level model in the Carbon Crafty range, it still comes with some really brilliant kit. It's got Fox 38s up front with a Fox Float X2 rear shock. This means you've got some of the latest suspension tech on the bike. It also means that it's equipped to deal with the additional stresses and strains that e-bikes put through the componentry. On the RR, we also have the Fox 38 and Float X2, but we're looking at the top spec factory versions, which means Kashima coating and all of the fancy internals. The bike that I actually got to ride was this one here, the RR, and it's a brilliant bit of kit. For me, when I'm usually riding e-bikes, I tend to find that, yeah, they are great fun on the downs, and they let you get away with a little bit of murder because of that additional bit of weight. But sometimes when it gets into those technical sections, I find that they're harder to flick from tire edge to tire edge and get around those nimble little corners. But I didn't actually really find that as much of a problem at all riding on the Carbon Crafties. They actually felt much more responsive and much more alive than I'm used to big e-bikes feeling. And when I was on the trail and it got into those tight technical sections, the biggest thing I noticed was the lightness of the rear end of the bike. It really can be flicked round and picked up and put where you want it, which means that when it does get tight and twisty, you're not there thinking you're on a barge of a bike that you can't quite get around. It really does flick from side to side really nicely. I could go into some of the corners with a lot of pace, get on the brakes nicely beforehand, shed some speed, and find plenty of traction. Part of this is to do, I think, with the forward geometry, which we spoke about before on the Mondraker bikes. Now, this forward geometry shifts your weight forward and helps you ride that front wheel, and in doing so, really helps you maximize the grip you can get from the front end. And I found with the Crafties, the same thing I found when riding the Foxies, that if you really do commit to the front wheel and trust the grip will be there, it'll start to ping around corners really nice and smoothly. Taking the Crafty off some jumps also tended to be pretty fun. It wasn't hard to pick up, and that again comes back, I think, to that much lighter feeling rear end. When you actually get hands-on with one of these bikes and pick them up, you'll find that the weight is very balanced from front to rear. And that for me gave me a nice, stable feel in the air. Climbing on the Crafty, as I'm sure you can imagine with e-bikes, is one of the things you wanted to do pretty well. The whole point of having the e-bike is so it can get you back to the top of the trail so you can get on with riding again. I think it's a mix of the slightly chunkier tyres and the zero linkage suspension that Mondraker use really helped to provide traction. So even when I got to a few quite blown out climbs on some fairly off camber routes, I had the odd slip of the wheel here and there, but mostly it tracked the ground really well and it kept me climbing really comfortably, even when I was sat there in turbo mode just trying to pop to the top. This bike though isn't just made for flying down big, steep technical descents. It's still actually a lot of fun taking it on a big XC ride, getting on little bits of single track, and being able to hop around, pop off side hits, and do all the sort of fun stuff you'd usually want to be doing on your shorter travel, non-e-bike bike. The whole of the Crafty range, whether it's the Carbon Crafties or the Aluminium Crafties, they all now come with Bosch's latest generation of motor and battery and kiosk system. This means you've got a 750 watt-hour battery in there, which provides you plenty of power for all-day rides or even whole weekend rides, depending on what you're doing. My first experience of riding the Crafty was actually out in Spain when Mondraker flew us out there, and I went out on one of the Carbon Crafties for about 4.5, 5 hours in some of the steep hills around Alicante, and I still came back afterwards with about 30% battery left. So if you were going away for a weekend, looking to do a few longish days, but not crazy long, you'll probably find that the whole charge in that battery would get you round fairly well.